What would you do if you discovered your billionaire husband's affair while carrying his twins? Eleanor Everett thought she knew the answer to that question, until it happened to her. 6 months pregnant and glowing with anticipation, Eleanor sat in her Manhattan obstetrician's office, one hand resting on her growing belly, while the other held her husband's phone. Cormac had stepped out to take a business call, leaving his device behind on the leather chair. That's when it buzzed. The message preview lit up the screen. "Can't wait to see you in Houston tonight, Lily." Have you ever felt that sinking feeling when everything perfect suddenly shatters? That moment when your heart drops into your stomach and the room starts spinning. Eleanor felt her breath catch as she stared at those words. Her perfect world, the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the charity galas, the private jets to Napa Valley, all of it built on a foundation of lies. But this wasn't just any text. This was from a woman whose name Eleanor had never heard before, making plans with her husband on the very day he'd promised to attend their twins' ultrasound appointment. The same husband who'd whispered sweet promises about their growing family just that morning over breakfast. Eleanor's hands trembled as she set the phone down, her mind racing. Who was Lily? How long had this been going on? And why did the timing feel so calculated, so deliberate? The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined. Here she was, carrying their children, planning their future, while Cormac was living a double life. The man she'd married in that fairy tale ceremony at the vineyard, surrounded by 300 guests and enough flowers to stock a botanical garden, that man was a stranger. But what Eleanor discovered next was far worse than simple infidelity. As she sat there, in that sterile medical office, watching other expectant mothers chat excitedly with their partners, Eleanor realized this was just the beginning. The text message was merely the first domino in a chain of revelations that would expose secrets dark enough to destroy everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her husband, and ultimately herself. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, hit that like button, because you're going to want to hear how this story ends. What Eleanor uncovered about Cormac Rourke's empire would shock you, but what she did next, that will leave you speechless. To understand how devastating that text message truly was, you need to see the life Eleanor was about to lose. Their love story had started like a Hollywood movie. Eleanor Everett, a runway model whose face had graced the covers of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, first met Cormac Rourke at a charity auction in 2017. He was the mysterious billionaire in the corner, bidding on a money with the casual confidence of someone who never worried about price tags. She was the stunning philanthropist hosting the event, raising money for literacy programs across America. Their wedding the following year was pure American excess. The Napa Valley vineyard they chose cost more to rent for one weekend than most people earn in a lifetime. 300 guests flew in on private jets, dining on caviar and champagne that cost more per bottle than luxury cars. Eleanor's dress alone, custom Valentino with hand-sewn pearls, had a price tag that could fund a small non-profit for years. But it wasn't just about the money. Cormac Rourke was Texas oil royalty, the heir to an empire his father had built from nothing in the 1980s. Starting with a single well in the dusty plains outside Houston, the Rourke family had expanded into a multi-billion-dollar petroleum conglomerate. Cormac took over at 35 and transformed the company into something even more powerful, more ruthless. Eleanor loved his ambition initially. While other wives complained about workaholic husbands, she admired how Cormac could walk into boardrooms and command respect from men twice his age. He spoke about business deals the way poets talked about art, with passion, precision, and an almost frightening intensity. Their Manhattan penthouse became the backdrop for a life most people only dream about. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, art collections worth more than small countries' GDP, dinner parties where senators and celebrities mingled over $1,000 wine. Eleanor transformed herself from model to high society philanthropist, channeling her platform into causes she genuinely cared about. She thought she was living the perfect life. The kind of marriage where your husband surprises you with weekend trips to Paris, where charity galas become second homes, where pregnancy announcements come with plans for nurseries that cost more than most people's houses. But money can't buy loyalty. The first crack appeared months before the devastating text message. Cormac started working later, traveling more frequently to Houston for urgent business meetings. Phone calls that he'd take in other rooms, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when Eleanor entered. Business dinners where spouses weren't invited, despite years of her attending every company function. When Eleanor asked about these changes, Cormac had explanations that sounded reasonable. Oil markets were volatile. Expansion required his personal attention. Success demanded sacrifices. What she didn't know was that Cormac viewed relationships exactly like his business deals, transactions where everyone had a price, and loyalty was just another commodity to be bought and sold. His employees feared him not because he was inspiring, but because he was calculating. Cold. The kind of man who could smile at you over dinner while planning your professional destruction. Eleanor had fallen in love with a facade, a carefully constructed image of the perfect American success story. The reality was something far more dangerous. Comment below, do you think money changes people, or does it just reveal who they really were all along? That text message was just the beginning. What Eleanor discovered next would make her question everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Unable to shake the image of that Houston meeting with Lily, Eleanor did what any suspicious wife would do. She started digging. Late at night, while Cormac slept beside her, she went through his laptop, his phone records, his credit card statements. What she found made her blood run cold. Millions of dollars had been transferred to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Not company money, their personal wealth, systematically moved over the course of 2 years. The accounts weren't in Cormac's name. They were registered under the name Lily Thornton, a 28-year-old executive at Rourke Petroleum who just happened to be Cormac's director of international operations. But wait, it gets worse. Eleanor knew she needed professional help, someone who could navigate the complex world of high-net-worth divorces. That's when she found Ruth Martinez, a family lawyer whose reputation for dismantling powerful men's empires was legendary. Ruth had taken down tech moguls, real estate tycoons, and oil barons who thought their wealth made them untouchable. Ruth's first meeting with Eleanor lasted 4 hours. By the end, both women knew they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple affair. "Mrs. Rourke," Ruth said, sliding a thick folder across her mahogany desk, "your husband hasn't just been unfaithful. He's been planning this for years." The folder contained bank records, birth certificates, and private investigator reports that painted a devastating picture. Cormac hadn't just been having an affair with Lily, they'd had a child together. A 4-year-old daughter named Avery, hidden from Eleanor and the public, supported by a trust fund worth $50 million. Eleanor felt the room spin. While she'd been planning their fairy tale wedding, Cormac had been raising a secret family. While she'd been struggling with fertility treatments and multiple miscarriages before finally conceiving the twins, he'd already been a father to another woman's child. But the revelations weren't finished. "There's something else," Ruth continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Something you need to know about your own situation. Have you ever kept a secret that could destroy everything?" Eleanor was about to learn that she wasn't the only one with hidden truths. The twins she was carrying, Lucas and Lily, weren't biologically Cormac's. Years earlier, during a brief separation in their marriage, Eleanor had had an affair with her college boyfriend, Dr. James Sullivan. When she discovered she was pregnant, she'd convinced herself the timing worked with her reconciliation with Cormac. She'd never told anyone the truth, not even her doctor. Ruth had uncovered this through medical records and DNA analysis from Eleanor's previous pregnancies. The twins were conceived during the exact period when Eleanor and Cormac were separated, when she'd been staying with friends in Boston and seeking comfort from her past. Now Eleanor faced an impossible situation. Her husband was a cheating, manipulative liar who'd hidden millions and a secret child. But she was carrying twins who weren't even his biological children, conceived during her own moment of infidelity. When Cormac finally learned that Eleanor knew about Lily and Avery, his response was calculated and cold. He offered Eleanor what he called a generous settlement, full custody of the twins, a modest trust fund, and her silence about his business practices. In exchange, she would disappear quietly, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and never speak publicly about their marriage. Eleanor's response. She laughed in his face. "You think you can buy me like you bought Lily," she said. "You think money solves everything." That's when Cormac showed his true nature. The charming billionaire facade dropped completely. He threatened to destroy her reputation, to expose every detail of her modeling career, to make sure she never worked in philanthropy again. He had lawyers who could tie up custody battles for years, private investigators who could dig up dirt on anyone. But Eleanor had Ruth Martinez, and Ruth had been waiting her entire career for a case like this. The battle lines were drawn. Cormac thought his wealth and power made him invincible. Eleanor was about to prove him wrong. This story has more twists than a thriller. Subscribe so you don't miss the ending, because what Eleanor does next will shock you. October 15th, 2022. The night that changed everything. Thunder crashed against the Manhattan penthouse windows as Eleanor stood in her walk-in closet, 7 months pregnant with twins, packing a single black suitcase. Rain pelted the glass like bullets, matching the storm raging in her heart. This wasn't a spontaneous decision born from emotion. This was a carefully calculated plan she'd been crafting for weeks. Eleanor had learned something crucial from watching Cormac's business dealings. The most powerful moves happen when your opponent least expects them. While he was in Houston, presumably with Lily, planning their next offshore transfer, Eleanor was executing her own strategy for freedom. She packed only essentials: 3 changes of clothes, prenatal vitamins, her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only jewelry that held sentimental value rather than monetary worth. Everything else, the designer gowns, the diamonds, the symbols of a life built on lies, she left behind. On the marble kitchen counter, she placed a handwritten note that would become legendary in legal circles. "Cormac, you taught me to value power over love. Now I'm teaching you the cost of arrogance. Don't look for us. We no longer exist in your world, Eleanor." But Eleanor Everett was about to cease existing entirely. The transformation into Evelyn Lane had been months in the making. Using skills she'd learned from investigative journalists during her philanthropy work, Eleanor had created a new identity. Cash from personal accounts she'd secretly liquidated, a used Honda Civic purchased under her new name, fake documents that would pass casual inspection but wouldn't hold up to serious scrutiny. Her destination wasn't random. New Orleans called to her for reasons that went beyond hiding. It was where Dr. Kai Jensen lived. Kai had been Eleanor's therapist during her modeling days, helping her process childhood trauma from an abusive father. More importantly, Kai was connected to a network of activists, journalists and advocates who specialized in helping women disappear from dangerous situations. Not all abuse leaves physical scars, and Kai understood that financial and emotional manipulation could be just as devastating as physical violence. The 9-hour drive through the night felt like crossing into another world. Eleanor stopped only for gas and bathroom breaks, constantly checking her rearview mirror, her heart pounding every time headlights appeared behind her. With each mile that passed, she felt the weight of her old life falling away. New Orleans embraced her like a long-lost friend. The French Quarter's narrow streets and hidden courtyards provided the perfect labyrinth for someone who needed to vanish. Kai's contacts found her a modest apartment above a bookstore, paid for in cash, registered under her new identity. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt like she could breathe. But Cormac's reach was longer than she imagined. Within 72 hours of discovering her disappearance, Cormac had mobilized resources that would make government agencies jealous. Private investigators, security firms, technology experts who could track digital footprints most people didn't even know they left behind. The bounty he placed on information leading to Eleanor's location, $10 million. Not for her capture, that would be illegal, but for any verified information about her whereabouts, her new identity, or her plans. $10 million was enough to turn friends into informants, enough to make strangers scrutinize every pregnant woman they passed, enough to put Eleanor's face on the radar of bounty hunters across the country. Eleanor had thought she was playing chess with a master. She didn't realize she was playing against someone who owned the entire board. The stakes had never been higher. Here was a pregnant woman with limited resources, trying to build a new life while carrying twins, being hunted by a billionaire with unlimited funds and no moral boundaries. Would Eleanor's desperate gamble for freedom succeed, or would Cormac's money and power drag her back into a golden cage? While Eleanor was building her new life in New Orleans, Ruth Martinez was preparing for legal warfare in Manhattan. What happened next would become one of the most spectacular courtroom battles in American divorce history. Ruth didn't just file for divorce, she launched a nuclear strike against Cormac's empire. Her countersuit alleged embezzlement, fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. She claimed Cormac had systematically stolen marital assets to fund his mistress's lifestyle, hidden paternity to avoid financial responsibility, and used company resources for personal gain. The media attention was immediate and devastating. The New York Post dubbed it the oil baron's shame. CNN ran daily segments tracking the case. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding justice for Eleanor. Suddenly, Cormac Rourke, who had spent decades carefully crafting his public image, became the face of everything wrong with American wealth and power. But Ruth's masterstroke came during discovery. Cormac's legal team had made a critical error. They'd claimed Eleanor had abandoned the marriage voluntarily, painting her as an unstable woman who fled without justification. To support this narrative, they submitted security footage from the penthouse building showing Eleanor leaving alone on that stormy October night. What they didn't expect was Ruth's response. "Your Honor," Ruth announced during a packed courtroom hearing, "the defense has presented edited footage. We have testimony from building security that Mr. Rourke personally ordered the deletion of additional footage from that same evening." The courtroom fell silent. Ruth called her witness, Thomas Chen, former head of security for the Manhattan building. Thomas had been fired 3 days after Eleanor's disappearance, ostensibly for budget cuts. In reality, he'd refused to permanently delete security files that showed Cormac returning from Houston that same night, hours before Eleanor left. Mr. Rourke knew his wife was leaving, Thomas testified, his voice steady despite the packed courtroom. He came home, they had a confrontation in the lobby, and he let her go. He wanted her to disappear. Then he paid me $50,000 to erase the evidence and pretend he was never there. The revelation was explosive. Cormac hadn't been the abandoned husband seeking his missing wife. He'd orchestrated her departure and then used it as a legal strategy. But Ruth wasn't finished. Over the next 3 days, she presented evidence that destroyed Cormac's credibility completely. Bank records showing he'd paid private investigators to harass Eleanor's former friends. Phone records proving he'd been in contact with Lily throughout Eleanor's pregnancy. Medical records revealing he'd known the twins weren't biologically his, but had planned to use paternity as leverage in custody negotiations. The final blow came when Ruth called Lily Thornton herself to testify. Lily, clearly terrified but legally compelled, revealed that Cormac had promised to divorce Eleanor after the twins were born. He'd planned to claim Eleanor was an unfit mother, win custody, and then raise all three children, his biological daughter Avery and Eleanor's twins, as his own empire heirs. He said children were assets, Lily testified, tears streaming down her face. He said Eleanor would never fight him, because she didn't have his resources. Judge Patricia Williams, a 20-year veteran of family court, had seen enough. Her ruling was swift and decisive. Eleanor would receive full custody of the twins, $15 million in damages for fraud and emotional distress, and protected status preventing Cormac from any future contact attempts. Additionally, the court ordered a criminal investigation into Rock Petroleum's business practices. But here's what made this victory even more extraordinary: Eleanor never returned to claim it. Ruth announced to the packed courtroom that her client wished to remain in her new life, that the judgment would be donated to organizations supporting women fleeing abusive marriages. Eleanor didn't want Cormac's money. She wanted justice, protection, and the freedom to raise her children away from his influence. The ripple effects were immediate. Rock Petroleum's board, facing criminal investigations and public relations disaster, voted to remove Cormac as CEO. Stock prices plummeted. Investors fled. The empire that had taken 40 years to build began crumbling in 40 days. Share this if you believe justice eventually wins, because sometimes the most powerful victory is walking away from the fight entirely. 2 years after her midnight escape, Eleanor had built something extraordinary from the ashes of her old life. Safeguard Mothers became more than just a non-profit. It became a lifeline for women trapped in situations eerily similar to Eleanor's own. Operating out of a renovated warehouse in New Orleans' Marigny district, the organization provided legal aid, safe housing, and new identity assistance for women fleeing financially abusive marriages. Eleanor, still living as Evelyn Lane, had found her true calling. No longer the polished philanthropist writing checks at charity galas, she worked directly with women whose stories broke her heart and inspired her daily. She understood their fear, their shame, their desperate need to protect their children from toxic environments disguised as privilege. Her memoir, The Art of Disappearing, became an underground sensation. Published under a pseudonym with all identifying details carefully altered, the book detailed her journey without ever naming Cormac directly. Women across America recognized their own stories in her pages. The book's proceeds funded 3 additional Safeguard Mothers locations across the South. Lucas and Lily, now toddlers, thrived in their new world. They attended a progressive Montessori school where diversity was celebrated and wealth wasn't a measuring stick for worth. Lucas showed early signs of his mother's compassionate nature, always sharing his toys with children who had less. Lily demonstrated a fierce independence that reminded Eleanor of her own strength. The twins had no memory of penthouse living or private jets. Their childhood was filled with streetcar rides, jazz festivals, and bedtime stories read in cozy apartments rather than marble-floored nurseries. They were happier, healthier, and more grounded than they ever could have been in Cormac's world. Meanwhile, Cormac's empire continued its spectacular collapse. After losing Rock Petroleum, his personal investments crumbled under the weight of legal fees and criminal investigations. Lily Thornton, facing her own legal troubles, abandoned him completely and disappeared with their daughter Avery. Multiple lawsuits from former business partners and employees drained his remaining assets. By 2024, the man who once commanded billion-dollar deals was reduced to living in a modest apartment in Houston, his reputation destroyed, his wealth evaporated, his relationships burned. He'd gained nothing from his years of manipulation and lost everything that ever mattered. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. While Cormac schemed to accumulate more power and control, She'd found true wealth in helping others and raising her children with authentic love. But success hadn't erased all of Eleanor's struggles. Late at night, when the twins were sleeping and the French Quarter was quiet, except for distant jazz music, Eleanor wrestled with guilt about the secrets she still carried. The court case had established legal paternity and custody, but it hadn't addressed the deeper truth about the twins' biological origins. Eleanor had never told anyone, not Ruth, not Kai, not even her own diary, about Dr. James Sullivan, her college boyfriend who had provided comfort during her separation from Cormac. But Eleanor had one final secret that would change everything, a revelation so profound it would redefine not just her understanding of family, but her entire sense of identity and belonging. The truth was more complicated than anyone could have imagined. 3 years into her new life, Eleanor discovered a truth that would shatter everything she thought she knew about motherhood, identity, and belonging. During a routine medical exam for Lily, who had been experiencing some developmental delays, doctors recommended genetic testing. Eleanor agreed, expecting standard results that would help guide her daughter's treatment plan. What she discovered changed everything. The twins weren't biologically hers either. The medical records revealed that during her fertility treatments years earlier, before she'd even met Cormac, there had been a mix-up at the clinic. The eggs used for her successful pregnancy weren't her own. They belonged to an anonymous donor. Her affair with James Sullivan had occurred, but the twins were conceived through the fertility procedure, not their brief reconnection. Eleanor stared at the genetic report in her New Orleans apartment, feeling the weight of this final revelation. Lucas and Lily, the children she'd risked everything to protect, shared no biological connection to her. They weren't Cormac's children. They weren't James's children. They weren't even hers. But here's what made this discovery liberating rather than devastating: it didn't matter. Every sleepless night she'd spent caring for them, every story she'd read, every scraped knee she'd kissed, every moment of joy and frustration and unconditional love, none of that required shared DNA. She had chosen to be their mother every single day, and they had chosen to be her children. This final secret freed Eleanor completely from Cormac's world. There were no biological ties binding her to his legacy, no genetic claims he could make, no inheritance rights to complicate. The twins belonged exactly where they were, with the woman who had sacrificed everything to give them a life built on love, rather than manipulation. Eleanor's story teaches us profound truths about modern life and the courage required to choose authenticity over comfort. What defines a real family? Is it DNA, legal documents, or the daily choice to show up with love and commitment? We all face moments where we must choose ourselves, moments when staying seems easier but leaving represents freedom. Eleanor's journey shows us that sometimes the bravest choice isn't fighting the system, but walking away from it entirely. Eleanor chose freedom over gold chains, authenticity over appearances, and love over wealth. She discovered that true power doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from helping them find their own strength. What would you choose if faced with Eleanor's situation? Would you have the courage to disappear from a life of luxury to find genuine happiness? Like if this story moved you, Eleanor's journey reminds us that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find ourselves. Comment your thoughts on Eleanor's choice below. Do you think she made the right decision? Subscribe for more extraordinary stories that challenge everything you think you know about love, power, and family. Share with someone who needs to hear this message about choosing courage over comfort.